Hello everyone, welcome to Sentence Diagramming 101. This video is about Chapter 5, Verbals, and we're going to cover the first part, Section A, which is about gerunds. But let's talk for a minute about verbals. Okay, so far we've learned about verbs, right? And they like to show action. Verbs like to verb, right? They like to do things. But in addition to that, verbs also like to do other jobs. They are an excited piece of grammar that's like, no, I don't want to do just one job and show action. I want to do all the jobs. And when your verbs aren't verbing, meaning they're not being the action in the sentence, we call them verbals because they are made out of words that usually show action, but in these cases, they're doing something else. And the three things that they can do is they can be gerunds, which is when a verb acts like a noun. They can be participles, which is when verbs act like adjectives. And they can be infinitives, which is when verbs want to stay in their base form, which is the to form, right? To sing, to dance, to speak. So in this video, we're going to talk about gerunds, that first one, right? When verbs want to be nouns. So how does this work? Well, when you take a verb, like the word watch, right? To watch, that is an action. I'm watching a thing. But if you say watching movies, well, all of a sudden, that's not an action, like the main action of the sentence. That is a verb in disguise doing a second job as a noun. So watching movies is actually what we call a gerund. It is a verb that has an ing attached to the end of it. And it's acting as the subject here, because when you have a gerund, which is a verb acting as a noun, it can do anything a noun can do, which means it can be a subject, it can be an object, it could be the object of a prepositional phrase. Anywhere you would find a noun in a sentence, you will find a verbal sort of standing in. A gerund will be there, like, hi, I'm just filling in for the day. I'm in my second job. So watching here is a gerund, and then movies is actually the object of the gerund. Just like we have a prepositional phrase, which is, a preposition, and then the object of the preposition under the bridge. So in this case, we have watching movies. So watching is the gerund, movies is the object of the gerund, and then watching movies is a gerund phrase. And then that whole thing is acting as the subject of the sentence. Let's practice this a little bit more. All right, so if you say swimming is his best sport. Swimming, yeah, swim, that's a verb, but not today. Today, swimming is a gerund with that ing, and it is acting as the subject of the sentence. The verb in this sentence is actually is, right? It's a linking verb. So swimming is sport is this sentence. So you've got a slivisk here, subject, linking verb, subject complement. Or what if you say, I love discovering new films? Well, I as my subject, love is my verb, discovering is actually the thing I love, making it the direct object here. The fact that it happens to be a gerund, discovering, right? And then films is the object of that gerund. So we have a gerund phrase acting as a direct object. Or we might say Evelyn learns new material by reading books. So this is a prepositional phrase. But how does she do it? By what? By reading, right? So reading is my gerund, books is the object of the gerund, so that gerund phrase is the object of the preposition by. So even though books is the object of the gerund, that's only within the gerund phrase, and then within the prepositional phrase that's a part of, this whole thing, reading books, is the object of the preposition. So you're going to start seeing little bits of language that are forming parts of bigger bits. So we're going to start chunking language out as our sentences get more complicated. So what else? Oh, you may find like reading, instead she learns new information by reading online. So in this case, this is still a prepositional phrase, but it's just by reading, and then online is an adverb telling me how she reads. So whereas in this one, she's literally reading books. So books is the object of the gerund. Online tells me how. So that is an adverb. So slightly different type of sentence. But what else do we have? Oh, I caught him staring. So staring here is your object complement, right? What is he doing? The him is staring. So staring is describing that object. You might have an indirect object. I made finishing the book a priority. So finishing the book is an indirect object. So you can see here that gerunds do all the things that nouns do. Now, how do you diagram a sentence? Well, you get to get exciting because you get to draw what my first group of students ever called a Zazie stand, because it looks like a Z, I guess. So they were like, these are Zazie stands. And then you write to the gerund sort of cascading, that's the word your grammar books use, cascading down over the right angle in your Zazie stand. So you have gerunds, which are going to look like this. So it would be like finding. So you get to curve your letters a little bit. If you're doing this on a computer and you can't really curve, just do it, slant it. That's fine. And then you're going to take this construction, the Z, you're going to put it on a stand like this, and then you are going to put it in the part of the sentence where it belongs. So if, swimming is your subject, it goes here. So you have a little gerund stand, swimming. And then the rest of the sentence is as you would diagram it normally. So if you say, same thing, I caught him staring, staring's my gerund. All right, well, then staring goes over here. So you get to draw little stick figures now. We're drawing stands. It's a good time. And if you keep going, you're like, oh, object of the preposition. You have to give yourself space when you're dealing with gerunds because they go up on stands. And if you have a stand in a prepositional phrase spot, then you need space below. So diagramming sentences as we get more involved is going to require some spatial planning. Do them in pencil or erasable pen, which is what I use. So if you run out of room, you can move stuff over or add more. Now, if you have a gerund phrase with an object, you're going to put a little direct object line. So that's familiar, right? Just like information here. So you have the gerund and the object, and then that whole thing goes on a stand. So if she is reading books, right, it would look like this, by, and then reading books. Now, we could also have watching movies, so that whole thing is the subject, goes in the subject spot. Discovering new films, again, discovering, and then discovering what? Films. So films is the object of the gerund discovering, and that whole phrase is the direct object, so it goes in the direct object spot. And then if you have an indirect object, you're going to just put it on the line. Remember, indirect objects are like this bucket here, but there's no tail. Indirect objects do not have little tails, whereas if you look here, prepositional phrases do. So that's the difference. That's how you can tell an adverb prepositional phrase from an indirect object is indirect objects are like buckets. They don't have tails. All right, moving on. What else? Oh, we have finding a new series on Netflix. So you're finding, where are you finding it? So that's why the on Netflix goes under finding, and then what are you finding? A new series. Okay, so that's gerunds. Now, English, as you've discovered, is fun. So we have to pause here and talk about a thing called phrasal verbs. Sometimes in English, we use multiple words for the verb phrase. This is fine. We've covered this already in chapter 3, except we have a thing called a phrasal verb, which is a weird use of a verb. It's basically a verb plus a preposition to still make a verb. So it's cheating, essentially. And it's stuff like this. She took off her coat. So if you look at this, you might say she is my subject, took is my verb, and then off her coat. But off her coat isn't a prepositional phrase here. It's not like you can do a thing called off, you don't go to a place called off her coat. It's not like off the coast or something. So really what's happening is took off is your verb. One easy trick, if there is one, for phrasal verbs is to replace the phrasal verb with one word. If you can, it's probably a phrasal verb. Like instead of saying took off, I could say she removed, because that's really the action I'm describing. So took off, her coat is like removed her coat. So you're like, oh, okay, so it's still a verb. It's one action. So took off is a phrasal verb. She dressed up today. This one gets weird because if you're like, okay, she dressed and then up would be like up today. You're like, what does that mean? Like you dress up the day? I don't know if that makes any sense. So really your verb is like she dressed up, she wore something a little nicer, and she did that today. Or Nancy turned in early. Turned in is like a colloquial phrase for going to bed, right? But so you could say like Nancy slept early or something, or went to bed, went, and then to bed we would need the rest. But turned in is also a phrasal verb. Now, you've got a list here of some more, worked out the details. This would be like not working out your body, although that's another phrasal verb. You worked out at the gym, but in this case, Joe's working out the details. So he's organizing something or planning something. Nancy turned in her paper. She's not literally like curling her paper to turn it inside or something, folding it into a paper airplane. No, she turned it in like she handed it in. So in this case, turned in, submitted would be the one word replacement for that. Now this one is kind of funny. He ran into a tree. Okay. If you want to look at this and say he ran literally inside of a tree, like he's, I don't know, the tree is hollow or there's some sort of magic portal happening, it is Narnia, I don't know. Then this is a prepositional phrase. You're like, he ran and then he ran inside a tree. But I think that this sentence is probably not saying that. It's probably saying like he crashed into a tree. So in this case, ran into is a phrasal verb. And then, insists on, ended up, look forward to. Yeah, I know it's 3 words, but when in doubt, you can always Google, is this a phrasal verb? Is put in the verb there, is look forward to a phrasal verb. And you'll see examples online of situations where it could be. Started out, narrowing down, narrowing down is actually a gerund phrase, just kidding. But took is your verb here, so. But narrowing down, down is part of the gerund phrase. So that gets weird too. So phrasal verbs can be a little bit tricky. Go, when in doubt, Google it, but also refer back to this list. And then we've got a couple more common ones and the words that you can replace them with so you can identify them. So you're like put up, took off, broke out, got back, etc. Then this last little bit is when to split up into and onto. So sometimes it's one word and sometimes it's 2. So like she turned onto the street. Onto in this case is a preposition. He caught on to our plan. That's 2 separate things. Caught on is a phrasal verb. Like he understood our plan or realized our plan, recognized our plan. He is moving the car into the garage, prepositional phrase. He called in to try and win tickets. So now you're like called in, phrasal verb. So sometimes this can be confusing, but don't worry because you get to practice with all of the gerunds and an occasional phrasal verb. So take your time, do this exercise, look at the answer key for your answers, and then you can also watch the video overview of exercise 5A. And that has been gerunds.